these are two teams that make no sense, right? Neither one of them has any business winning football games, and yet with Mike Tomlin and Mike Vrabel coaching them, they both seem to win the majority of their football games. Something had to break, and the thing that broke was Will Levis.
You know, I know some people might look back on this game because there were a lot of penalties called, and it's not like it was this offensive onslaught. And I felt like certainly the offensive line play for the Titans wasn't good, but I was kind of entertained the entire time for that reason, because I just wanted to know at the end who fate loves more, because that is what has been the case with the Titans and the Steelers over the last couple of seasons, is that there are so many games that they win when it feels like they should not have, just because it's written in the stars or it's destiny or a higher power loves them more, or like whatever it is. So I was entertained highly until the end, figuring out what was going to happen here. But, I think the weaknesses for these teams I don't want to say that they were on full display, but we definitely saw them. I think we just saw some good offensive drives for the Steelers, but then we saw some other instances where, man, it just felt like there were a lot of head-scratching moves. On the other side of things for the Tennessee Titans, this team is so far behind the eight ball when it comes to the offensive line being what it needs to be, and I understand that they've got a lot of guys. They were showing the stat last night of all of the undrafted free agents that have had to play for this team because of injuries. And injuries, nobody likes talking about them as a valid excuse, because everybody's just like, oh, yeah, everybody deals with injuries, next man up, like that's what happens, like too bad. But injuries play a big part into how you play as a team. So the Titans, with all the injuries and the bad luck they've had, like they do have somewhat of an excuse. But even when this team's fully healthy, I feel as though this season of play for the Titans is showing us that the time when they were competing for playoff spots in the AFC is done. Like that part of their winning window is done. They're in a full rebuild right now. That's why, to me, it does not make sense for you to go back to Ryan Tannehill once he is healthy.
No.
You've got Will Levis. Ride it out, man. I mean, he has shown you, all jokes aside, in the first 7 quarters that we have seen from him, whatever it's been, okay, this is the dude that we need to let go out there and get some reps and figure out what he can and can't do, because we saw even last night some really great throws. So these are two teams that I don't think are legitimate contenders in any way. The Steelers, it's more, to me, like they're getting in their own way for a lot of that stuff, and that could be with coaching or with players. And the Titans roster is just, it's no longer built to even be that surprise team that it was a couple of years ago. So that's kind of my assessment of those two teams from what we saw last night.
Yeah, we'll get onto the Steelers in a bit, but I agree with you with the Titans. Okay, Levis is going to end up with not a particularly good PFF grade, but all of the damage happened on that final drive. Like, he had 3 turnover-worthy plays in the game, and all 3 of them came on the final attempt to win the game, right? 1 right at the start and 2 right at the end, and they were all catastrophic plays. But if you take those out of his game, we are talking about a guy who has 4 big-time throws in that game last night, who was doing it with an offensive line that was an absolute mess. I mean, the Titans' offensive line, particularly the tackles, the interior isn't atrocious, but the tackle play is horrendous. The tackle play is bad. They were getting hurt constantly and swapping around. So the offensive line was a mess. I mean, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different offensive linemen give up at least 3 pressures last night. So not only has Will Levis been looking quite good in 6, 7 quarters, but he's been doing it behind a terrible offensive line without the kind of platform that, some other players have. I think we've already seen enough from Levis, not to say, oh, we got it right, we've perfect, nailed it, scouting, win, but to say there's no point in going back to Tannehill, right? Like, we're 3-5. Tannehill isn't rescuing the season. Levis has already shown more in 8 quarters than Tannehill showed this season, so let him play. Like, apparently, if quarter 4 happens again, we're going to see some growing pains, but like, this was the point in drafting Will Levis, right? Was the idea that you might actually stumble into a Ryan Tannehill successor. Now's the time to find that out.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, when you look at that last drive, yeah, he had the 3 turnover-worthy plays, but, it's funny. I think his grade gets dinged more because he had more turnover-worthy plays, but it was a situation where they have to score a touchdown.
Right.
I mean, like, they have to move the ball down the field. So that's kind of what you want your rookie quarterback to do. Put the ball, obviously, like, he's very green in NFL experience. So where he's looking and the throws he's attempting, like, that's kind of, we watched him go through a lot of those learning curves last night. But let's say that the first one gets picked off, right? Okay, then the other two don't exist, even though it doesn't really take away or make the first one any less impactful. And that's just what he was trying to do all drive. They got to a point where they were within striking distance, and he was just taking a chance. Now, you got to see Darius Rush on the second turnover-worthy play that he had. The third one, obviously, you're just kind of throwing it up there and seeing what you can make happen. But to me, that last drive, I care way less about that last drive than I did his play before that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, you would love for him to take care of the football better, but again, like, it's his sixth quarter of play. You needed a touchdown to win. You were out of timeouts at that point. So, look, he got happy feet in the pocket. There were times where he was doing like a hop pass, and it's like, okay, well, that's why the ball didn't go exactly where it needed to go. That's why the accuracy wasn't exactly what it should have been. And so he'll learn those things. You could tell that he was skittish and he was panicky when he was back there, especially on that last drive. But there were a couple just absolute beauties in that game that, to me, is the bigger takeaway. I don't mean to look at him with rose-colored glasses, because we said at the top of the show I had him high on my draft board. But full context involved, those throws earlier in the game, especially the ones in the second half, meant more to me than the couple of turnover-worthy plays that he had at the end of the game, because those were learning lessons that were always going to come out, whether it was in one game or whether it's spread across a couple, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's actually a fascinating example of the difference between sort of production and a connected or an adjacent PFF grade and what your actual takeaways from the game are, right? And this is part of the problem or the disconnect where people are like, the PFF grade sucks because I saw something else, right? And it's also why we would say, look, one number is never going to tell you the entire story, right? You come out of this game, and Kenny Pickett is going to end up with a reasonably higher grade than Will Levis. All of it happened basically in the fourth quarter in the highest leverage plays. When Kenny Pickett needed a drive, Kenny Pickett hit the best and basically the only good pass that he hit in the day, down the sideline, set them up, they get a touchdown, they go ahead, right? Conversely, when Will Levis needs a drive, he melted down and he had 3 turnover-worthy plays on a drive, any one of which should have ended their game, and the final one did. So you sort of look at this, and by any objective measure, Kenny Pickett is going to end up with sort of more, not production necessarily, because obviously Levis had more yardage, but like the Steelers' EPA per play in passing terms is going to be way better than the Titans. That in those terms, Kenny Pickett did better, and therefore they won the game. But you come out of the game and you're like, Steelers' offense still kind of sucks. The passing game isn't functioning. But Will Levis did show a bunch of big plays, and he sort of undid the good work with those big mistakes that we talked about. But we're not grading talent, and I think what he has shown in the first 2 games that he's played is there is a talent there. His arm talent is obvious. He can make some crazy plays. He's bringing some crazy plays to the table that Tannehill wasn't. And it's not like Tannehill is absent of, physical ability, physical tools. So it's just a slightly different thing that you're quantifying, right? Like, he's not necessarily playing amazingly right now, but he is showing reasons to want to stick with him and want to invest in him and want to go forward with him.